Hi, everybody. Happy Lent. Maybe I shouldn't say happy. Happy Ash Wednesday just doesn't sound quite right, does it? um, I want to talk about Lent, though, because I grew up not celebrating it. And in fact, I did a little research before coming on here today. And where did it go? I found out. Shoot, I just had it pulled up here. Oh, history of Lent. Here we go. I Googled history of Lent. And when I was growing up, it was something that was deeply, religiously celebrated, committedly celebrated by Catholics and Anglicans, Episcopalians, and Lutherans, and somewhat the Methodists. And then today I learned in a question, where people ask on Google, does everybody celebrate this? It said, while in excess of 1 billion Christians observe Lent each year, not all Christians do, it is observed by Anglicans, Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Lutherans, and Methodists. So, yes, Presbyterians are kind of late to the show, but we did it sort of as in connection somewhere around, I want to say the late 70s, maybe it was the early 70s. Somewhere in there, we reconnected with some of our roots in worship, and that's when Psalms became really an integral part, and we started, again, an elevated integral part. And then we started looking at different orders of worship, like morning prayer and evening prayer and those kinds of things. And we returned to the liturgical colors, the stoles. When I was young, I'm sure many of you remember too, our ministers didn't wear stoles. Maybe they wore a Geneva gown, a plain black gown. Maybe it was in the 60s. I'm trying to think where I was. I was in Oneonta in First Presbyterian Church, and I can remember when we started having all of that, and then paraments that went with the vestments, and people liked it, added color, and helped us to keep track of what season we were in and to focus our thoughts throughout the year. And so I can remember early Lenten celebrations, usually during Holy Week. And often Maundy Thursday was one of the first. Well, Good Friday was always celebrated, but that was often, too, a community effort, not just the Presbyterians. I know because I was usually asked to sing Were You There at that. But yeah, so Lent, back to Lent. Maundy Thursday was where we started, and it would be with an agape meal. Then a couple of years later, it went to every Wednesday we would have a prayer gathering at church to commemorate Lent. But Lent itself, what does Lent lend itself to in your life? What does it mean? For many of us, it has now become a period of enhancing our faith, not of depriving self, but of enhancing what we believe, taking on something additional for this period of time. Let's be clear, Lent is a 40-day period, not counting Sundays. Sundays, no matter how you were supposed to fast during Lent, going back to the very early church, Sundays did not count. You could eat whatever you wanted on Sundays. Why? Because it's the Lord's Day, and we celebrate the Lord's Day no matter what. Now, some of us who are progressive feel like every day is the Lord's Day, so, we get into some theological questions there. But initially, it's the 40 days. It begins with Ash Wednesday today, and it ends with Easter. And it's the 40 days in between. And why the 40 days? Well, if you read in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus went out, maybe it's in John too, I'd have to look, but Jesus, right after his baptism, spent 40 days in the wilderness being tempted, tested. And this commemorates that time. And in the early church, it was the time when converts or new believers were educated. I'm sure it started before then, but that's where the training became very intense, leading up to their baptism on Easter Sunday. in honor of the resurrection. Isn't that kind of cool? So Lent, we know, has been around. I'd have to look this up, and I did not look it up when it started, when people started calling it Lent and commemorating Lent. For some reason, I have it associated in the far, far recesses of my mind with like the Council of Nicaea. So we're talking back in the 300s, 4th century. But it could have been even before then. So Lent has been around for a long time. And if you are any of those denominations that I named earlier, you have generations of Lenten observances and family traditions. Nowadays, it gets a little more complicated, doesn't it? Because many of us are not a part of a faith community that is the one we grew up in. For instance, Catholics who now worship as Presbyterians, or Methodists who are now Lutherans, or Lutherans who became Methodists or Presbyterian. I mean, there's just a lot of crossover, and we know that to be true demographically from different studies. So our cultures and our customs became intertwined as well. Then you look at the country as a whole and our regional cultures, and some regions are very strictly tied in with their religious origins, aren't they? So if you're in the coastal part of Massachusetts, for instance, where there's a large Roman Catholic population, or just like if you are in Chicago or parts of New York City where there's a large Jewish population, the culture just becomes influenced, or the culture influence, how can I put this? The dominant religion in an area influences the culture in that area. There we go. And so that spreads throughout the country, and people kind of create their own meanings for some of these seasons. For instance, most of us don't celebrate or observe the month of Ramadan as our Muslim brothers and sisters do, a month-long fasting. But we do have a 40-day fast that if you're into fasting and you want to make that part of your Christian tradition, this is it. This is Lent. This would be a time to do that. So there are many similarities across faiths. And Lent happens to be one of those times that could be pretty much what you need it to be as we prepare to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. So my question is, what do you need it to be? Ash Wednesday, I've recorded the service. If you would like to find it, it's on South's YouTube site, South Church Rochester, our channel there, and look under the short service tab, and you will find our Ash Wednesday celebration. It includes a service of prayer and letting go, and a couple of meditations. I do encourage people to write on a piece of paper those things you want to let go of, whether they're feelings or people or memories or whatever. Put them on there, and then to burn them carefully and use those ashes to place on yourself. I also like to include, and if we're in person, I always offer a service of blessing in addition to the ashes, either with water or with oil, to remind us that we are a resurrection people. And even though we might commemorate these earlier events, we know the outcome and we live in the fullness of God's glory of the resurrection. So what I'm encouraging both South and Downtown Church to do this year is to look at doing something special. And I found this online, 40 Acts of Kindness. This one happens to be for kids, but I love it because everything is accessible. If you just Google 40 Acts of Kindness, it seems to be a whole movement, and you can get different lists of ideas of things to do. Help pick up litter in the park. I mean, some of these might be limited by COVID, but others are not. Give a compliment to a local store owner. Hang up some kindness flyers, whatever you would want them to say. Read to dogs at the local animal shelter. Do a chore for a sibling or help somebody out. Around here, I'd say shovel someone else's walkway. Give your neighbor some flowers. And beyond the community, write a thank you letter to servicemen and servicewomen overseas, make blankets for Project Linus, knit preemie hats for a children's hospital. So there are things for all parts of the family, all different ages, and they're divided by those that you can do in the community, those you do for family and friends, and those that are beyond the community. So again, I just took this offline. You could find the same thing there. For me, I would rather do something special, or maybe read something special, dive into my spirituality a little more, provide more contemplative time for myself every day, more time to connect. Those are just some of the ideas. But I really encourage you to find what works for you, for your schedule, for your life, to make it special. And I'll tell you right now, many, many good intentions fall by the boards just because we forget, not because we don't want to do them. So, make yourself a little sticky note and put it up in front of you. Whatever you have to say to remind yourself that, oh yeah, it's Lent. I'm doing this. I'm going to do this today. And you'll be surprised how it will kind of anchor you in this period. Why do we want to be anchored? The one thing that separates Christianity from other religions is this sense of resurrection and new life, new possibilities. Other religions, have been other resurrections in the world. In our case, it is the resurrection of this man who taught us how to turn the world upside down. If you think about it, blessed are the meek, the poor. Everyone who is marginalized becomes blessed, not the rich and the powerful, unless they do good things for the poor and the marginalized. So as we learn more about Jesus and his teachings, we become disciples, people who choose to follow his way of life. And if we're choosing to follow his way of life, we want to celebrate his resurrection. And why is that so important? It's nothing that Jesus did. Let me just say that right up front. A lot of people say, oh, Jesus was resurrected. Yes, passive tense, was resurrected. Who did it? God did it. And the thing that the resurrection shows us is that nothing can keep us from God's love. Nothing, not even death itself. You can kill me and I will still be loved by God, and I will be brought to a new life. And that image, that metaphor, that reality affects us as we live our lives too. So as we prepare to celebrate that great event, that great reality and understanding, we have this ramp-up period so that we can get more anchored in our faith. I think that's the simplest way to explain Lent. All right, everybody. So figure out what you're going to do and start doing it. You got 40 days, not counting Sundays. Sundays you're off. And I hope it turns out to be a really meaningful season for you. Thank you for joining me for this prayerful pause with the pastor. I'm Pastor Deb Swift of South Presbyterian Church, and these are supposed to be a few minutes to think of something greater than ourselves. Today it happens to be about Ash Wednesday and the beginning of this Lenten period. All right, I'll see you next time. Take care, be safe, be well. God bless. Bye for now.